From childhood, a boy named Guy Yule considered his sister to be beautiful. The girl always received more attention from their parents. This angered the child, although he understood that he was inferior to her in appearance. One day, during a friend's birthday party, he saw a cake with candles and realized that he had always dreamed of blowing them out. Despite the fact that the celebration was not his own, Guy Yule did so. The birthday boy cried, and the others looked at the boy with incomprehension. Then he began to apologize and also cried, but with his face it looked much more pitiful and even cute. Therefore, all the guests, and even the child whose party it was, began to comfort the protagonist, convincing him that nothing terrible had happened. That day, Guy Yule understood how to properly use his appearance to evoke kindness in those around him, as his sister does. Even as he grew up, he did not stop acting this way, as it often helped in various life situations. For example, when he accidentally pushed a rude passerby, he showed with his facial expression that he felt guilty, and the passerby immediately began to apologize. Thanks to his appearance, the boy could indeed get absolutely everything he wanted, including romantic relationships. His ability failed only once when Guy Yule thought he had managed to make a classmate fall in love with him, but the latter perceived him only as a friend. It turned out that this person was annoyed by the protagonist's behavior and definitely did not consider him cute, so he ended their communication. Now the young man had finished his education and traveled to work every morning in a crowded subway car. The boy was a bank employee and was considered a fairly good worker thanks to his pleasant face and communication skills. No matter how rude or intimidating the client was, Guy Yule could easily gain their favor and sign a contract. However, this did not mean that the boy was not nervous during interactions with different people. Only during breaks could he relax a little. That day, entering the staff room, he reflected on the last client, who turned out to be a good person despite several factors indicating the opposite. Instead of a snack, the protagonist simply took pills to alleviate stomach pain and possibly prevent health problems. He had been doing this for over a week, as to remain beautiful, he had to reduce his food intake and adopt a diet. Trying not to torment himself with thoughts and futile dreams, the young man rested for a few more minutes before returning to his workstation. He realized that he was still not accustomed to interacting with clients and even felt fear towards them, but nevertheless he continued to try. Calling the next number in line, he saw a man in front of him who was expensively dressed but looked like a gangster. Initially, the strange stranger long ignored the fact that his turn had come, and Guy Yule even thought that this client had simply left without waiting to be called. However, when he saw the approaching man, the young man realized that this was far from a typical client like those he works with every day. Still, the protagonist tried to maintain calm and politeness, communicating with the visitor as befits a bank employee. At the same time, he assessed the client, pondering his age and appearance. It seemed the man was quite young, despite wearing sunglasses. Such an accessory is usually worn by those who want to hide their wrinkles. Thinking of this, Guy Yule remembered an interesting fact about Florida banks, where you cannot open an account if you come wearing sunglasses. Despite the protagonist's efforts, he obviously could not hide his nervousness, so even other employees noticed it. The stranger came to take out a corporate loan to open a travel agency. Such a request seemed simple until the young man saw the history of his financial account. The documentation showed that he had previously taken out several loans, which he had not yet closed, although the profit of his company was quite large. At the same time, the program for some reason allowed the client to take out a loan for the necessary amount, which was even stranger. Obviously, this visitor's business was illegal, probably created just to withdraw large amounts of money, avoiding punishment by law. The young man did not know what was best for him to do and was already planning to demand more documents and information, thereby delaying the processing of the loan and asking for advice from senior colleagues. However, suddenly he received a message from the bank manager and was ordered to immediately apologize to the client and enter his office. Such a thing happened very rarely. During the personal meeting, the man reported that the visitor's request must be fulfilled if the program allows it. At first, Guy Yule tried to dispute the boss's decision, as he understood well why it was not worth issuing a loan to someone who had not yet paid off previous ones. Nevertheless, when the manager insisted on fulfilling his words, the protagonist could not refuse and returned to his workplace. Most likely, there was a secret behind this that they did not want to reveal to a simple employee. Of course, he gets money for providing such services, but this time he was scared. The young man decided to keep evidence in case they try to accuse him of illegal actions. After that, trying not to show concern, he asked the client to fill out the documents for the loan. At that moment, for a few seconds, the man lowered his glasses and looked straight into Guy Yule's eyes, shocking him even more. Then the protagonist remembered all the unpleasant moments of his life, the mockery of his sister loved by his parents, and that guy who left without considering the young man's face cute. After that, the boy finally understood what kind of person was in front of him and felt even worse than before. Despite the fact that the presence of the client increasingly oppressed the young man, he tried to do his job well, even though he still doubted that he was doing the right thing. In the end, he could not do as his manager had asked. Instead, he decided to do the right thing, and then figure out how to explain it. All because he realized that it is not worth contacting people like this client, as it can bring big problems. Therefore, with the same calm smile, Guy Yule apologized and politely refused the loan, explaining the reasons he considered important. The client reacted to this with a smirk and simply left, promising that this was not their last meeting. The manager immediately went after the man, trying to bring him back and resolve the situation created by the bank employee. Even though the protagonist was accused of not fulfilling the boss's task, he was still sure that he was doing the right thing. To discuss the situation outside the office, the manager ordered the protagonist to prepare for lunch. When Guy Yule and the director arrived at the restaurant, it turned out that they served raw fish. Given that the protagonist was invited, he could probably have chosen something expensive for himself, but he could not eat such products due to stomach problems. Therefore, all he could order was rice porridge without any additives, which of course was very disappointing to him. The manager understood why his bank's employee disobeyed the order and decided not to give a loan to a person with such a bad credit history. However, the boss convinced the subordinate that he ordered him to act precisely that way, not for personal gain or to receive money from such loans. Although the man had not returned to his country long ago, he knew well that there were many criminal groups with whom it was better not to enter into conflicts. Now the whole bank has big problems, and only the young man who created the unpleasant situation can solve them, so he will have to follow the manager's instructions. Although he had no chance to refuse, the boy understood how unpleasant a matter he had to delve into. The strange client, meanwhile, was already heading home in his car, his driver trying to explain that what happened was most likely a simple mistake. He also suggested that the boss go to any other bank to get what he wanted, but he decisively refused to do so. The next day at work, the protagonist remembered what the boss had told him earlier at lunch and was upset about the upcoming meeting. The man was grateful to his employee for his care, as he tried to protect not only himself but also the entire bank organization. Only it is too early to relax in this situation, as the danger of acquiring even bigger problems with the criminal world still remained. Fortunately, they promised to pay him a lot of money for his help, as much as he could earn in a year, but only if everything goes well. Guy Yule really wanted to sleep by the end of the working day, but unfortunately, he could not go home right away. All because he received a message from the boss that he needed to come to the specified address that evening. Moreover, before meeting the frightening gangster, the protagonist still had to buy a new suit, the money for which he found in a book on his desk. Of course, all this seemed quite unsafe, but the young man respected the manager, as he had always helped him before, even though he had many responsibilities. Therefore, the boy still arrived at the specified place, an expensive restaurant, even though he did not buy new clothes for himself. The staff of the establishment politely greeted the guest. They immediately knew which private room to take him to. The strange client was already waiting for the offender, but when he entered, he paid no attention, continuing to examine his glass of wine. The situation was becoming increasingly awkward. Ga-yul was tense and did not know what to expect from the interlocutor, as this person could very well be dangerous to him right now. The protagonist had time to examine the man's face, which did not seem frightening, but his fear did not diminish. The boy realized that every time he saw the strange stranger, he felt sadness from not being able to openly express his hatred for the gangster. The protagonist often had to follow the orders of others, despite his own protest, and he did not like such a life. The bank employee tried to justify what he had done earlier and also wanted to solve the problem by correcting his mistakes and drawing up a contract. The interlocutor seemed not to listen to his words. Instead, he accused him of the aversion he showed at their first meeting, although he did not look like a fighter for justice. It turned out that the lawbreaker had prepared for the conversation and learned many facts about Ga-yul's past. The young man was the second child in a mediocre family and graduated from the history department, only after which he went to work in a bank. Obviously, he was interested in the protagonist, no matter in a bad or good sense, but the man would not study the past of someone who was indifferent to him. Most likely in this way, the gangster wanted to show his superiority over the one who behaved disrespectfully with him. Even more so, he managed to hurt his feelings by mentioning the sense of inferiority compared to others that the young man had previously experienced. Nevertheless, remembering what he promised the manager, Ga-yul tried to continue smiling and trying to please the lawbreaker. Only now the man no longer intended to take a loan from the bank, so the young man had to independently figure out how to properly apologize. Unexpectedly, the protagonist began to behave completely differently, began to openly be rude to the interlocutor, boldly offering close contact as an apology since nothing else can be used. The lawbreaker was not surprised at all. He even approached the protagonist and hinted that probably this was not the first time he had made such an offer to a stranger. Not receiving the proper reaction, the young man poured a glass of wine on the clothes of the insolent interlocutor, hoping to end the already protracted conversation in this way. The man got angry, so he grabbed the boy by the hair, brought his face closer to the stain, and ordered him to take responsibility for his words and actions. In this way, he tried to subdue the bank employee to his desires, but the latter did not stop resisting, shouting bold phrases to the opponent. In this situation, Ga-yul considered himself protected at least by the law on the inviolability of each person, so he was very bold. The next day, the young man had to report to the manager about how the conversation went. Unfortunately, the news was not comforting. Rumors about the special client spread quickly, and during the break, all bank employees discussed only this topic. The protagonist had to tell the whole truth. The conflict was not resolved, but fortunately, he was able to avoid details in this dialogue. Of course, he was not paid the huge amount promised, but no punishment followed. He could return to his workplace. One of Ga-yul's colleagues was very angry with the young man. Obviously, he participated in correcting the program to issue a loan to the gangster, although he tried to hide it during a personal meeting. This person was resolutely determined to take revenge on the protagonist, as he not only spoiled his work, but also preserved evidence that the law was violated. The protagonist could only think about the money he never received. Of course, the work was not completed, but the boy already regretted that he had agreed to it at all. Striving to calm himself, the young man decided to focus on work, but he still could not forget what had happened, as the man behaved terribly. Now the best option for him would be to forget all this, as the manager instructed him, although this task proved quite difficult. The atmosphere in the bank changed, becoming much noisier and more unpleasant, and Ga-yul decided to return to serving clients. For some reason, everyone the young man tried to call ignored him until the queue reached a man who seemed like another gangster. However, apart from his strange appearance, he turned out to be completely ignorant about the business he supposedly intended to take a loan for. He kept referring to his assistants, who were also quite foolish, and did not provide any clear answers that would help the bank employee. In the end, it turned out that their issue needed to be resolved with the help of the protagonist's senior colleagues, and he was forced to postpone it for another time. After that, more and more people approached the young man with the same question, which he could not solve immediately and independently. Obviously, they all did not understand business and just worked for his enemy. Watching the failures of Yul, who was previously considered the best employee, the rest felt their superiority and mocked him. Although the young man understood who was behind all this, he could not defend himself in this situation, as he had no evidence. After a few weeks, the protagonist had a lot of work that he could not figure out, despite the quite simple requests for them. Therefore, he increasingly stayed late at work, missed the train, and was forced to spend extra money on a taxi home. One evening he decided to drink, as enduring such pressure from the lawbreaker was quite difficult. At first, the boy tried to convince himself that this person would give up and stop bothering him, but it seemed he was mistaken about that. In fact, despite the sly look and arrogance, the gangster was obviously stupid, as his stubborn actions proved. In the evening, the protagonist fell asleep at the table in his apartment, too drunk from just one can of beer. When he finally came to work, a girl from his department decided to start a conversation with Yul, as she was worried about his behavior in recent days. The problem was not only in the delays, which had now become very frequent, but also in the results of his work, which had significantly decreased compared to what it was before. The girl did not want to scold the protagonist, as she understood that he was trying very hard, but also asked him not to create problems for himself and others. When the young man asked the employee about the changed appearance of clients lately, she could not answer him, as she did not notice the difference. Obviously, the gangsters only came to him. Since the boy was still very late, he was allowed to have lunch first and only then proceed to perform his work duties. Being alone in the staff room, the young man reflected on how hard it had been for him lately, although he had been happy to receive this position before. The worst part was that it was forbidden to share what had happened with anyone he knew, and in a difficult situation, Yul was left alone. Unexpectedly, one of the young man's colleagues entered the room and informed him that he was expected in the office for special guests, which did not bode well. As soon as the boy entered, he immediately saw that unpleasant lawbreaker conversing with the bank manager. The men were discussing a peaceful resolution to the misunderstanding that had arisen between them. The manager was obviously afraid of the client's negative reaction, so he was trying to please him. Eventually, he left the room, leaving the protagonist alone with the person he absolutely did not want to see at that moment. At that very moment, Yul realized that he was simply being used to avoid trouble for the organization. He did not fully understand how to act, but he thought he had a good opportunity to figure everything out. Previously in his work, the young man tried to do everything as best as possible, but he should not have had to endure clients' anger outside the office. Smirking arrogantly, the gangster openly declared that all those visitors who brought the protagonist many problems were his messengers. Of course, this was quite obvious before, but hearing it from the culprit of the situation made him feel even worse. The boy did not want to hold on to resentment and anger. If it were not for his position, he would have beaten the scoundrel and destroyed everything around him. Trying to remain calm, Yul tried to find out why the insolent man had summoned him this time and again apologized for the previous incident. The lawbreaker wished for the protagonist to fulfill what he had said last time without thinking close contact with the man. Of course, he did not want to engage in such activities, so he tried to accuse the interlocutor of excessive interest in young men. Even such a barb could not hurt him, as the gangster explained his desire by saying that he was simply going to humiliate the person who did not obey him in this way. It seemed that the villain knew too much about the young man. He even managed to describe the character of the bank employee, even though he had not yet had the chance to know him that closely. It turned out that Yul was quite weak, although rather smart. His main problem was the habit of meddling in other people's affairs and creating the image of a noble person. Moreover, he did absolutely everything he was told, even if he had to engage in very indecent things. After these words, the protagonist could no longer hold back, as he was too angry about all the terrible actions of the client, who thought that being a guest of the bank, he could do whatever he wanted. The man did not even hide his arrogance towards the bank employee, who could no longer maintain decency. Approaching the gangster, Ga-yul decided to hit him, but barely had time to swing when a large male hand stopped him. Obviously, it was useless to fight. But the client could easily hurt the bank employee just by slightly twisting his wrist, but that was not enough, and he pinned the unfortunate man to the table, holding his hands. The young man screamed, trying to break free from the tenacious grip, but at first he could not do anything. However, after a sharp movement, he managed to not only free one hand, but also hit the opponent in the face. After that, he pushed the villain onto the chair and climbed onto his knees, intending to continue hitting him repeatedly, but at that moment his colleague entered. The girl was going to offer the guests tea, but she saw a completely strange situation. Ga-yul's clothes were crumpled, and he was very close to the man. The boy wanted to say something in his defense, but the client lifted his shirt, thereby confirming the girl's shameful suspicions. After that, she, of course, hurried out the door, feeling awkward, and as soon as she returned to the other employees, she told them what had happened. Later, the witness of the unpleasant situation and her friends from work were eating meat and drinking at a cafe after a hard day. Naturally, their main topic of discussion was the protagonist and his strange behavior towards some men. One of the group recalled that when the young man was hired, he also had strange recommendations, which played a decisive role in this. Initially, the boy was placed in the emergency security department, but he was too weak for such work. Ji-yul's colleagues even had the desire to report his illegal acquisition of the position to keep the hiring system honest. In the end, no one thought more seriously about such an idea. Instead, everyone decided to congratulate the best employee of the month and continue their small break. In the office, while the days were usual for the rest, everything was getting much worse for the protagonist. The boy did not justify himself to the team for what happened, as this would only confirm his guilt. All he tried to do was calm himself down and work productively, even deciding to skip lunch due to feeling unwell. In the staff room, Ji-yul heard others talking about him, as if he obviously provoked the situation in the special guests' room. Noticing the boy, they of course fell silent, but still looked at him with condemnation, to which he simply smiled, as if he didn't care. After that, the protagonist hurried to continue with his duties, not wanting to waste time on such people. The employee sitting next to the young man bought coffee for everyone except the object of general condemnation, trying to justify this by saying he simply forgot, although this was clearly not the case. Ji-yul remembered that the case of the gangster T-Jin was originally supposed to be handled by this employee, and now he probably realizes that he lost profit because of the young man, so he treats him badly. But it was not just one person. All of the protagonist's colleagues started passing the poor guy that part of the work they previously did themselves. No one hid their condemnation anymore, and everyone tried to make the young man's life in the office as difficult as possible. Even when Ji-yul tried to refuse extra tasks that were not part of his duties, he could not do it. The unfortunate man had to stay in the office almost all night to finish all the assignments. However, he was not alone. The girl who saw the situation that spawned the shameful rumors about the boy also stayed late into the evening. As he was about to leave, the protagonist heard the girl sitting on the stairs and discussing him with someone on the phone, mentioning all the gossip she herself had spread. Listening to all this, the young man felt that he was being unjustly accused, but at the same time it was impossible to prove it. The boy decided to go home and continue work in the morning, but as soon as he went outside, he immediately saw T-Jin. The man wanted to finish their previous conversation, but this only angered Ji-yul, as it was because of this man that he was forced to suffer from condemnation. The young man hesitated to approach the villain, glaring at him venomously, trying to contain his emotions. At some point, he realized that he simply could not win, so he showed indifference to the presence of the gangster. The protagonist walked past the lawbreaker and, stopping a taxi, went home to finally get some rest. T-Jin did not expect his victim to escape so easily, as he had been waiting for him for quite a long time and was confident that he could now definitely subdue him. Behind the wheel, the man pondered the behavior of the protagonist, who had tried to resist for a long time, but eventually still gave up, failing to defend himself. Nevertheless, he was sure that sooner or later he would achieve his desired outcome, and the young man would agree to all his conditions to receive forgiveness. The gangster remembered a moment from his childhood and the words spoken to him about submission, and understood that he disagreed with them. The man liked to achieve the submission of others. Ji-Yul turned out to be a much more problematic victim than T-Jin had anticipated. But this did not mean he was ready to give up and leave the young man alone. Meanwhile, the protagonist was riding in a taxi, and the driver was worried about his condition as he looked unwell. Therefore, the stranger even offered to take the boy to the hospital, but he refused as he just wanted to rest at home that night. The unfortunate man's condition was getting worse, and only after entering his apartment did he change his clothes and fall asleep on the sofa. Ji-Yul had a rather unpleasant dream, based on the rumors about his close contact with men and partly on the boy's past. The vision became even more terrible when a huge black snake appeared in it, clearly foreboding danger. The reptile coiled around the poor man's body and approached his face, and the boy could only scream, expressing protest, which could not help save him from this creature. Eventually, the snake was about to attack the protagonist to kill him with its bite, but at that moment, the young man woke up. It seemed to him that only a few minutes had passed, but it turned out that Ji-Yul had slept for several days without a break. Before, the boy could not imagine that this was even possible. Still unable to think normally, he switched on a loud TV channel and drank some water. After that, he began to ponder what to do about work, as he could no longer be among people who constantly discuss him negatively. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that he had already missed several days without warning and might have been fired. Of course, he did not want to return to the bank, but if he had no job, he would not be able to pay for his housing. Unexpectedly, there was a knock at his door. Ji-Yul assumed it was a delivery, so he opened it without a second thought and immediately regretted it. On the threshold stood T-Jin, who, as always, smirked condescendingly at the sight of his victim. The young man immediately wanted to hide, slamming the door, but the uninvited guest did not allow him to do so. The man wanted to talk, as he already knew how many days the protagonist had missed at work, and that he was unlikely to be able to stay in the same position. Therefore, the gangster gave Ji-Yul a business card of his company, inviting him to work there starting the next day. T-Jin's assistant tried to ascertain whether his boss had indeed decided to hire someone with not the best level of qualifications and experience. The man didn't want to hear about it, as he had already made a decision that he considered correct and was not going to change it. As it turned out, in order to hire the protagonist, one of the employees had to resign. Meanwhile, Ji-Yul looked at the business card he had recently received and was about to throw it away, as if he had no intention of accepting the offer. However, he still went to the office, which made his new boss smile contentedly. Although the young man had no intention of accepting the offer initially, the man seemed to know that his victim would still appear. Now the protagonist was about to receive a work contract and a list of duties, after which he would start performing them. With feigned joy, the company owner expressed hope for good cooperation with the newcomer. Ji-Yul had a completely different goal. He believed that it was better to keep enemies closer, and by being near the villain, he would find a way to defeat him much faster. Once, the young man thought he could be like everyone else and live a peaceful life, but now he realized that this was not the case and no longer intended to pretend. Now he would act exactly as he wanted, unafraid of judgment from others, all for his goal. To properly take revenge on his offender, the protagonist decided to either make him suffer or make him become attached to the young man, only to hurt him afterward. The duties were simple for an office worker, and Ji-Yul was confident that he could perform them, so he hurried to start as soon as possible. However, his new colleagues seemed strange to the boy. They seemed completely unable to work with a computer. As soon as the young man brought his stationery, a man of terrible appearance approached him from behind and started asking where to buy cute writing supplies. It felt like everyone around was watching the boy, making him uncomfortable. However, this was not the biggest oddity of the company. When he opened his work computer, Ji-Yul noticed that all the files were in a very simple and inconvenient format. He decided to ask other employees about this and found out that they didn't even know about new programs for office work. All calculations were done using paper and a calculator, not even realizing that there are simpler methods. The protagonist had to teach them even the simplest functions to automate the work of the entire department, and it eventually became easier for him. The situation increasingly irritated the boy. He didn't want to explain elementary things to all the employees, so he even thought about resigning from his position. However, calming down, he remembered his real goal and decided to pretend to work on reports while looking for problems in the company that could reveal the illegal actions of its owner. To finish the work, Ji-Yul had to stay in the office late, making him feel very tired again. Even after finishing with the documents, the young man didn't go to rest but started looking for more information about the firm, but unfortunately he couldn't find anything useful for himself. At that moment, someone called out to him from behind, although the boy thought he was alone in the building, which frightened him. Closing the window where the search details could be seen, the protagonist turned around and saw T-Jin's assistant. Trying to justify his actions, Ji-Yul informed that he was just about to leave, so the boss decided to give him a lift. The young man disliked the offer, so he firmly refused, but the senior did not accept any excuses and insisted on his own. In the car, the boy felt awkward, and his leader tried to show care for the subordinate, inquiring whether he had any problems in the team. Of course, Ji-Yul did not reveal that none of the employees could properly work with a computer, as he did not plan to expose others. Moreover, the gangster's assistant expressed his readiness to protect the newcomer in case any unpleasant situation arises. The next news was not very pleasing to him. The protagonist was to have dinner with T-Jin the next day, and refusing was not an option. This was explained by the fact that the company's leader needed to know more about the newly arrived employee. They even chose a restaurant without raw fish, as he disliked such food. The whole next day, Ji-Yul pondered that this was clearly not an ordinary company, as the documentation was kept in a strange way, and it was unlikely that the director personally dines with each newcomer. During the meal, the man with a satisfied smirk inquired about how the protagonist's work was going, but he responded with customary barbs. Moreover, for the overtime work and the multitude of tasks that were not on the list of duties, the young man boldly requested double pay for himself. However, for this, T-Jin put forward his own, not very convenient working conditions for the boy, as well as a multitude of additional tasks. He explained this by the boy's education not being suitable for the position. He could not deny it, so he just got angrier. Ji-Yul asked a direct question that had been troubling the unfortunate man since the first encounter with the lawbreaker about the reasons why he was doing all this. It turned out that he still wanted the young man to fulfill the loud promise he made on the day of their last restaurant visit. The protagonist decided that he could win in this struggle, and was ready to use any methods for his purpose. Therefore, setting aside his glass, he approached the interlocutor and sat directly on his lap, indicating that close contact between them could occur. In return, the young man asked for a salary increase, and the man smirked, noting how much Ji-Yul probably needed the money. However, even this did not deter the persistent boy, who continued to hint at something more, using his appearance to achieve the desired. Thank you for watching. If you want me to continue this story, please like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. See you very soon.